My name is Kim Bixler. I grew up in the only Frank Lloyd Wright house in Rochester, New York. It was built in 1908, and my parents owned the house from 1977 to 1994. Now, I wrote a book about the subject, Growing Up in a Frank Lloyd Wright House, a hardback book. I'm also in the PBS documentary, Frank Lloyd Wright's Boynton House, The Next 100 Years. And I would assume that many of you have seen this. It was produced by WXXI. Today, I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and I'm going to show a lot of clips from the documentary and a lot of photographs and tell some great stories. And then I'll open it up for questions. And I can stay as long as you'd like. So first, I just wanted to let you know I live in California now. And since I do, I thought we'd start this kind of Hollywood style, but I made the video myself. And this is a movie trailer about growing up in the Frank Lloyd Wright house. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show. So the credits are one of my favorite parts, so hopefully you'll take a second to read the credits. It's very unusual doing this remotely instead of in person, so. Okay. So when we moved into the Frank Lloyd Wright house, I was 8 and my brother was 6. And in case the clothes aren't a dead giveaway, it was the 70s. But before we moved in, the previous owners had a full schedule of fee-based tours. So for $1 or $2, you could have a tour of the Frank Lloyd Wright house. But that wasn't very feasible for my parents with 2 young kids at home. So they limited the tours to architecture students and professors, community groups, charitable organizations, and the occasional stranger that begged for a tour. But my mom and dad did think it was very important for me and my brother, I'll take off my glasses, me and my brother to start giving the tours. So what my mom did is she had typed up these note cards on these little pieces of paper. These are the actual note cards. She found them in her recipe box just a few years ago and gave them to me. It's pretty amazing. But I would stand on the fireplace with the note cards in hand and I would begin the tour the same way, 8 years old. I live in a house designed by architect Frank Lloyd Wright for widower Edward E. Boynton and his 20-year-old daughter, Beulah. Edward Boynton is the partner in the Ham Lantern Company, and then I would hold up one of the lanterns. Now, he was familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright from one of his business associates who Frank Lloyd Wright designed his house in 1892 in the Chicago suburbs. Now, our house was completed in 1908 and cost between $45,000 and $50,000. Now, that was for the house, the lot, and the contents, which was a staggering sum at the time. Now, factoring for inflation, that translates to roughly $1.4 million in today's dollars. But let's put this in perspective. The house, my parents bought the house in 1977 for $110,000. They sold the house in 1994 for $425,000. In 1996, they sold again for $260,000. That's a story unto itself. And then in 2009, it sold for $830,000. Now the house sits on just over an acre. It's just under 5,500 square feet, the house is, and it has a driveway that runs one city block to the other, from East Boulevard to Hawthorne Street. The house originally on this huge property, this large piece of property, it had beautiful reflecting pools, magnificent gardens, a tennis court, swimming pool, well, reflecting pool. But in the 1920s, J. Oswald Daly proceeded to lose all of his money in the commodities market. Then he lost all of his wife's money in the commodities market. And the way he got himself out of that pickle, he started selling off the property. So unfortunately, today it sits on just over a half an acre, and gone are the reflecting pool, gone are the tennis courts, and gone are those magnificent gardens. So here's another picture, a really wonderful picture here of what it used to look like compared to what it is today. Now the house has 10 rooms total. It has 4 bedrooms, it has 3 full baths and 4 half baths, 2 of which did not work when we lived in the house. One was in the garage and one was in the basement. Now the house is very unique because it still has 17 pieces of original Frank Lloyd Wright furniture in the house. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright would design anything and everything for his clients. Actually, he preferred to design everything and anything for his clients. He was even known to design a dress for the lady of the house. Now, the reason he did not want people to bring in their own furniture and like ruin his design aesthetic. So if you look at these pictures of the house, it's really fascinating. He did a lot of built-in cabinetry. He's got a lot of trim detail. There's very little wall space to put your own paintings. And he really considered his art glass windows all the art that was necessary for this house. This is a wonderful clip of the documentary featuring my mom, who you'll meet at the end of the talk because she's here listening. And this is from the PBS documentary.
You know, we'd have very casual parties sometimes, and you know, you'd have hamburgers and hot dogs, and you'd eat at the Frank Lloyd Wright table, which is this elegant, elegant table, yet it is casual and just your home.
Frank Lloyd Wright designed this furniture to be very specific to the houses that he designed. And these components are architectural features that help define the spaces that he envisioned. And without the furniture, you simply can't have a true Frank Lloyd Wright experience. It's impossible.
And that is like my favorite segue, because when my parents first moved into the house, they were contacted by Sibley's department store. And many of you are familiar with Sibley's. They are now since out of business, but it was a large department store in Rochester, New York. And they were doing a catalog shoot, and they asked if they could use the Frank Lloyd Wright house for their shoot. And of course, my mom thought that sounded fantastic. So she let me and my brother stay home from school that day. And we watched as like an art director and photographer. They moved all the furniture out. Now this is the living room, and this is what they put in for the catalog. So I don't know. I'm not sure if Frank Lloyd Wright would have really loved that design. And then they also went into the dining room, and they removed all the original Frank Lloyd Wright furniture, and this is what they put in its place. I can just see Frank Lloyd Wright rolling over in his grave. So I do have more pictures of more rooms in the house, but they're in the book. So it's just really so fascinating to see the different design and aesthetics over the years. Now, there were definitely were perks of living in the Frank Lloyd Wright house. And, you know, in 3rd grade, you know, when most people are bringing something in for show and tell, well, show and tell was my house. And I was the tour director for the day. And every kid in my class got to have a permission slip. They took it home. We rode the bus to my house. And then they had a tour. I was 8 years old. I'm giving this tour. And at the end of the tour, every single kid got to sit at a Frank Lloyd Wright table in a Frank Lloyd Wright dining room at a Frank Lloyd Wright chair and eat donut holes and drink orange juice. Now, during my tour, when I was a kid, I would point out that there were 253 stained glass windows, doors, and light lenses in the house. And what was fascinating is one of my favorite details to point out was, you can see, hopefully you can see my cursor here. So this white portion of the light fixture is the same size as this portion. I'm sorry, this portion of the light fixture is the same portion as this part of the window pane. This little has a corresponding shape here, and then back here, another corresponding shape. So there was these examples of geometry and symmetry throughout the house, and it really made the house very pleasing and beautiful. Frank Lloyd Wright liked to say, repetition of pattern and shape create a rhythm in a building like a piece of music. Now, our house was comprised primarily of squares and rectangles. So in addition to having all the windows unique to the houses, the furniture was. So if you find a piece of furniture or you find a window pattern, you can trace it back to the house that it belonged to. And what is even more interesting is that Frank Lloyd Wright designed over 1,100 structures. About a little over 500 were completed, and there are over 400 that are still standing today. So just think, that many original ideas, that many furniture patterns, that many window designs. And our house had a number of window designs inside. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright took a lot of influence from nature. So this is a sumac plant, and these are his interpretation of a sumac plant, and these are the windows in the Dana Thomas house in Springfield, Illinois. This is a tree of life. This is the tree of life, his interpretation. These are the windows at the Darwin Martin House in Buffalo, New York. I'm sure many of you have been there. He also had a playful side, and when he was asked to do a playhouse for the Coonleys, he kind of riffed on a parade and balloons and confetti. And these are the windows for the Avery Coonley Playhouse, and that's in Riverside, Illinois. And then finally, this is the Hollyhock House out here in California. I love this drawing. It really shows how you break down the plant into its basic geometric shapes. And you can see this motif going throughout the house in Hollywood, California. Now, this house, my mom and dad did a really great job of always making it feel like a house. It never felt like a museum or a mansion. It was very warm and inviting. It was a great experience. And every single person in the house, all of us, were greatly influenced by living there. And actually, a couple of my classmates are architects now, and they became architects, they said, largely because of the experience of seeing the house and growing up in the house and visiting the house all the time. So I thought that was a really amazing story. My mom also is a jeweler. Many of you may know her from Clothesline or Cornhill, and you can see the influence of the house in her jewelry, which I just think it's interesting. Now, the perks didn't stop when I was a kid. When I went to college, I was a sophomore, and I was at Cornell, and I was taking this class, Crime and Punishment, and I was getting punished in this class. It was hard. It was terrible. And one of my classmates said, Kim, you should tell the teacher the professor that you live in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. I said, why? And he said, I don't know. He's always talking about Frank Lloyd Wright, I heard. I mean, I don't know why, but you should tell him. So I thought, can't hurt. So after class, I went and stood in line with all the other brown nosers. I said, Professor Somkin, I live in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And his face immediately lit up. He's like, oh my gosh, my wife, she was an apprentice for Frank Lloyd Wright. Do you have any pictures of your house? Can you come over on Friday night? I was like, okay. So I called my mom, and she mailed me some pictures of our house. And that Friday, I put them in my backpack, and I walked over to his house, designed by his wife in Ithaca, New York. And he met me at the front door, and he took me into his living room, and there were 10 people sitting there. And he's like, everyone, this is Kim. She lives in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. I invited her over to talk about her house. I was like, that's a guest lecturer, and I didn't even know it. But I went and I stood on their fireplace and thought about what it was like when I was 8 years old again. And I was like, I live in a house designed by architect Frank Lloyd Wright for widower Edward E. Boynton and his 20-year-old daughter, Beulah. And they had a great time. They loved their tour. Now, so I've talked about some of the perks of living in the Frank Lloyd Wright house. Now it's time to talk about some of the pitfalls of living in the Frank Lloyd Wright house. And Mother Nature was one of them. So I'm going to start this off with one of the other clips from the documentary, talking about our experience versus the current owners. You've got to realize that my mom is like the biggest optimist in the world. So everything is great. But it was a tremendous, it was a big money pit, but we still all loved it. So here we go. The leaking roof, the constant repairs, we did what we could to keep it together.
It was worth everything. It was worth every penny. And doing the work on the house was also a pleasure, because you felt like you had a piece of history that you owned, and you got to participate in its fixing up. I think Fran and Jane have that attitude, and I just wish that we had had the funds to be able to do more.
So I was talking about Mother Nature, and when I do these presentations at other places in the country, especially in California, I show these pictures, and I get these, oh my gosh, these reactions. Of course, everybody in Rochester's like, oh yeah, that's like next week. But so we had our snowstorms, we had our ice storms, and we had these series of flat roofs in Rochester that abutted these clear story windows in the dining room. You can really see an image of these windows. And just, if you did not go out right away and shovel the snow, what would happen? The snow would pile up against those windows, and the heat from the house would melt the snow, and it would just get inside the house. So this next series of slides requires no narration. This is not nice, water either. And this is a picture after we had moved out. Now, these were all pre-2009. So the house may have looked really beautiful from the street, even when we lived there, but if you really got an up-close look. So who wants to buy a Frank Lloyd Wright house now? Raise your hand. I still do. So one of my favorite stories was when I was doing the research for the book, is that husband and wife are talking, and the wife is like, I don't understand. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright is a master architect. Why do his roofs always leak? And the husband turns to the wife and says, honey, what do you expect when you leave a piece of art out in the rain? So I think that pretty much sums it up. So Mother Nature was not the only one that was particularly rough on the Frank Lloyd Wright house. Humans did their share as well. So in the 1960s, we had a tremendous number of, not a tremendous number, we just had a few people that did a lot of painting in the house. They painted, put linoleum up, a lot of renovating or changing the rooms. So the 1960s, you can see a lot of really crazy colors throughout. And then in the 1970s, that really heralded the beginning of the restoration and stripping projects, mostly do it yourself, starting with the owners right before us, who were basically broken from doing it all. They just said, we're done. And my parents, they really took up the helm of trying to strip and restore as much of the trim and the woodwork and whatever they could, the furniture that was left in the house. So here's a wonderful video. Now this is a professional version of the furniture and the trim and everything being done. So you can really see why it looks so much better today when a professional does it.
Along the way, various rooms in the house had been painted. Up in Beulah's bedroom, everything had been painted turquoise, the screens and all that. And that turquoise gets down into the cracks and the pores of the wood. And there's no way you can correct that or get rid of that short of stripping it with a paint stripper with methylene chloride. That's what actually does the work of helping loosen that up. But then I also had to attack it with brass bristle brushes and scrub every board with a brass bristle brush. That has to be done twice, and then it's scrubbed down with solvents to clean it even more. And then it's ready for sanding and staining and varnishing. So it's really a laborious process.
So you remember when I was saying that the previous owners did tours of primarily the first floor, and that was because this is what the second floor looked like. Now this was my bedroom. You can see Curious George is smiling, but I don't think he's very happy. Now my bedroom was turquoise. It had turquoise trim. It had turquoise wallpaper. It had turquoise plush carpeting. The radiators were painted turquoise. My mom, she's so wonderful. So she saved some of the swatches of wallpaper after they did the stripping project. So this was another wonderful treat for my hope chest, I guess. So this was another big project, the kitchen. It had linoleum. It now has wooden floors. This entire kitchen butcher block was also painted kind of this puce green kind of color. In the living room, Arlene Howard, who lived in the house in the 60s, she loved her poodle. She loved her poodle so much, she decided she wanted to paint the whole living room to match her poodle. So she painted the walls poodle gray. She painted the floor. She painted the trim poodle gray. She put in gray carpeting, and she even painted the fireplace poodle gray. So when I was talking to the previous owner, right before we moved in, she said that hands down, stripping that fireplace was the worst job she ever did. And she pretty much, it was a lot of a do-it-yourself project. But you still look closely in those grains. And this is a picture of the bricks after it was professionally done, after like around 2010 and 11. And you just can't get the poodle out of those bricks. Now, one thing, what's fascinating about these bricks too, is these are Roman bricks and they're long, narrow bricks. But what Frank Lloyd Wright did to emphasize the horizontal even further is he took all of the mortar on the horizontal joints and he made them much deeper and a lighter color mortar. And on the vertical joints, he made them much shallower and a darker color. So you can see this is one of the projects they were doing. They were just working even more. And then you really can see, so when you stand back, it just looks like one long row of bricks to emphasize the horizontal throughout the house. Now, the house had some major problems when the current owners purchased the house in 2009. There were three really big ones. One is support beams in the basement had been removed. And in some places, the house was sinking. It was 8 inches under the ground. And that was just causing a number of different rot problems. The second thing was there was extensive termite and carpenter ant damage. Now, there weren't really active colonies inside the house, but a lot of the damage had been done. And much of the wood was like the consistency of mulch. Now, luckily, many of the wooden frames were cypress and they had been spared. Now, here's a wonderful clip from the documentary that kind of gives the scope. Oh, nope, not yet. One more last thing. The third thing, the third one was when they took off the ceiling in the dining room, undersized structural beams between the first and second floor were spec'd to be 8 by 12s. And when they took off the ceiling, they realized they were 6 by 8s. So first thing they had to do is shore that up to make sure that the second floor was sturdy. And I think back and I'm like, oh, my parents let me have a water bed really above those beams. So it's amazing things didn't fall down. So here is the clip. Those are the three things. And here's a really interesting clip from the documentary.
And this is typical of what happened all the way around the house. And this wood, instead of being a support beam, has more the strength and consistency of a head of lettuce. It's very light and very weak. So we have gone around and replaced all of that. We've done that in starting with the basement, of course, and then working up.
We replaced all of these beams. We went in with 2 by 24s, 3 of them together, to replace the main support beam over the dining room ceiling. And so I think that'll be there for a very long time. And we replaced all the other support walls in the basement, structural pieces that went outside. And 7 months later, we were finished. But now we're ready to start restoring the house. So we lost 7 months up front.
So this is just some really interesting pictures that show, I like to show like before, during, and after of the ceiling in the dining room. Sorry, they're not perfectly lined up. Now, one more clip from the documentary. This really gives you an idea of the scope of the project. So this is the dining room, and they really took everything apart. There's 5 miles of trim.
This, I am told, is one of Frank Lloyd Wright's favorite rooms of all the homes he's built. And it certainly gets a lot of press. For good reason. There are 3,000 pieces of glass in this room. This being the premier room of the house, it unfortunately was suffering from a lot of roof leakage and deterioration of plaster and wood. So basically this room had to be disassembled and then restored and reassembled. Every board in this room was removed and numbered, put back. We have LED lighting up here now, where it was bulbs before. This room also has this beautiful server with its 7 art glass doors and its many drawers, and a beautiful quarter-sawn board of oak on the base. That's all backlit with LED now, so that we can showcase its contents. This is
So, in addition to the inside of the house, Fran and Jane did an amazing job outside as well. And there are some dramatic changes, especially if any of you guys have ever driven by the Frank Lloyd Wright house. And, you know, why is the house getting so much attention is just because in 2009, they purchased this house and then they did this massive project. Now, there are 3 different kinds of things. It could be a restoration, a renovation, or rehabilitation. Now, a restoration is to bring it back to its original design. You could do a renovation, you change things around, fix them up, move things around, knock out walls, or rehabilitation, which is you bring things up to modern standards. So they did a little combination of all the things. They really did an amazing restoration. But they did want to have things brought up to modern standards. They wanted to have 7-zone heating. They wanted to have air conditioning. They wanted to have a dishwasher that actually was built into the kitchen, which we never had. We like dragged ours across the kitchen floor and then put it on the hose on the faucet. Or they wanted to have a real refrigerator instead of that ice box, which we used as our refrigerator that had been converted within a compressor in the basement. And that was our ice box. However, the biggest thing that they did was when they first moved in the house, it looked like it was frowning. You know, the roof was just sad. I mean, it was 100 years old. But then when they started looking back at original photos of the house and original drawings, they realized that the front porch was open. And it had been enclosed in the 1920s, which was very different. And so there was quite a bit of discussion between the two of them, which I'm going to show in this clip. And this talks about the scope of just changing the porch back to its original design.
Now, they did it in a fairly sensitive way, but they made some significant modifications. They rebuilt the walls. They lowered them by over a foot and a half, which allowed them to install taller windows. And then in order to have an appropriate ceiling height, they took out the floor of the porch and they dropped it down 2 steps.
It was beautiful. And it had weathered very well. We purchased the house, we saw the porch, we said, "Nee, that's great. We have a year-round porch. We can go out there in the winter, in the summer, open the windows in the summer and enjoy it."
The idea to put the porch back to its original was my idea. Fran wasn't so sure we should do that because he felt, yes, we were losing space, as well as this is Rochester, New York, where it's cold, and we wouldn't be able to use the porch very often.
Jane said, "You know, we really ought to return the porch to its original design." And I said, "Oh, no, I can't lose my year-round porch."
But I felt, and very strongly, that this was sort of a signature design of Frank Lloyd Wright's, and that's how the house was originally.
So there was a lot of soul searching about, okay, we want to see that again. We'd love to pay homage to the original design, but if we do that, then we're giving up space.
I was on the side of keeping it. She was on the side of changing it. Guess who won? She won.
I think that from an aesthetic standpoint, the opening of the front porch back to its original design is probably the best decision that could have been made to really restore the design features within the home.
For the community and for the preservation community, is a very exciting decision that they made.
Of course, we had to rebuild the whole porch when we did this. The height of the wall that surrounded the porch, the stucco ceiling, A lot of the superstructure above the porch needed to be reinforced. So we spent a month or two on that.
We actually took the front porch back to its original size and the planter in the front back to its original. Everything looks exactly like it did when the house was built.
When we took the plastic tenting off and exposed the porch, there was traffic in front of the house. People were stopping and staring at it, as I am sure they did in 1908. So that was gratifying to know that we had made the right decision.
Okay, so how am I doing on time? Okay, doing great. But I've got to keep on going. I have some great pictures before and after. So these are some wonderful side views you can see of the house originally with the porch open. And then this is once again with the porch enclosed. This was probably in the mid-90s. This is back to what it was like originally when it was open. And another one when it's closed. And then you can just see this is in process. And then this is the final result. Very, very dramatic there. Now, in addition to the front porch, the other thing was the landscaping. Now, I talked about at the very beginning of the talk is it was on an acre and now it's on a half an acre. And how do you make it look like, it's this prairie style house sitting on this flat, expansive piece of prairie, this land? Well, the way that they did that is they took, right now, as I mentioned, the house had a driveway that went from one city block to another, from East Boulevard to Hawthorne Street. And what they did is they removed the driveway in the front of the house. And instead of having a driveway walkway, they just went back to having a walkway. And then you enter the house from the back. And then they changed the landscaping, and they had the landscaping just go right up to the house. No shrubbery, no decoration. And it really does look like it is placed on the prairie. Really quite dramatic. The other thing, the other major change was the garage. Now, the garage was not original to the house, I think because they didn't have a car at the time. And then it was soon added. With the house, the garage had active termite damage, termite colonies and damage. So they petitioned to get permission to demolish the garage and build a new one. So you got to realize that anytime they wanted to do any project, they have to get the permission of the City of Rochester zoning. Then they have to go to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. And then they also have to go to the Landmark Society of Western New York. So each one of those steps just adds time. There's a lot of layers and a big approval process, but they got permission. So they demolished the garage and built a new one. And that's what they put into place. So, I mean, I'd live in that garage and be pretty happy. The other thing they realized that there was a pergola in the original drawings, many of the drawings, but they couldn't build it where it was on the blueprints because that piece of property now had a couple of different houses. So they put the pergola where I think it's logical between the garage and the house. Pergola is a covered walkway. And then the last thing is that, they had that beautiful reflecting pool that's gone. And what they did is they kind of did this really Asian influence koi pond in the backyard to kind of bring back the idea of having a reflecting pond there. Now, I am going to go through a couple of, I love those home reality television shows where they have these before and afters. So this is all new. Like if you've seen my presentation before, I've definitely made some pretty big changes. And this is one of the sections that's quite dramatic. I really went through and culled a lot of pictures from over the time. But since in the interest of time, I've only focused on a few rooms. But before I do that, the last thing I need to talk about is the windows. So first of all, you do not call them leaded glass windows because they're not lead. We call them art glass windows. And actually the caming, the black part, that is zinc, and that's much sturdier. So we just say they're art glass windows. Now then here's a clip from the documentary. I think this is the last documentary clip, and this is about the windows. And the reason the windows all had to be fixed is when they did a pressure test in the house when they first moved in, the current owners that did all this restoration of the house. And the pressure test came out as a 0. That means you could basically put your hand up against the windows and you could feel the air coming in the windows. So everything really needed to be shored up. It was a huge project. So here's the documentary clip.
That is cutting it apart, getting the broken pieces out, taking out the old cement as much as possible. Any mismatched pieces that were previous repairs, I've replaced those with the proper glass. The new zinc matches the original, and they look old.
Panels back, reinstall them, and then put the restored windows back in place. That went fairly smoothly, but it took 9-10 months to do that. Of course, we were doing other things, so it didn't matter too much.
So, okay, so you walk into the house. The first thing you do is you're met with a blank wall, because Frank Lloyd Wright really wanted to create drama. So first, the front door is not in the front of the house. It's off to the side. But you walk in, and it's kind of directing you. So the first thing you do is then you take a right, and you go into the foyer. So this is original foyer. This is what the foyer looked like in the early 70s. No, that was 60s. And then this is what the foyer looks like today. Oops, sorry. I'm afraid I muted somebody on purpose. But okay, then we have the living room. And this is what the original living room looked like. And I'm just doing a real fast forward into what the living room looks like today. Really gorgeous. The kitchen, dramatic changes. As I showed you earlier, here's the kitchen in the 60s. This is the kitchen in the early 70s. This is the kitchen when we lived there, but let me assure you that was not on a day of a tour. That's pretty crazy. Here's my mom cooking in the kitchen. She always has that smile. And that's me and my brother. This was our refrigerator, our icebox refrigerator. And there's me with the exact same haircut that I had when I was 10 years old. This is the kitchen here during, I would say probably it's about 2010, 2011. And the original icebox. And this icebox actually had some doors that had been plastered over, one for milk deliveries and one for ice deliveries. And this is what the kitchen looks like today. And here's another beautiful picture of it. This is the master bedroom. I've got some great pictures. They're unfortunately different perspectives, but you really get an idea of what it looks like. This is when we lived there. And that's what it looks like today. This was my dressing room, which we've talked about a lot because I don't know, if the person who painted this turquoise, if they had known that this would be such an interesting topic of conversation. So this is when, after we had stripped it, but it's in the grains of wood. You just cannot get that turquoise out unless you do this professional restoration, which they did. So this is also when we were there, and you can see the quality of the wood, but they did put mirrors in those doors. So that's the same picture there. Here's a picture of, if I had known I was writing a book and doing a presentation, I would have taken a lot more pictures of the house and a lot better pictures of the house. But these were all my pictures, my parents' pictures from the 70s, 80s, 90s. And this is what the dressing room looks like today. Now the dining room, obviously the most dramatic changes. This is probably 1910 or 1919. There was a batch of photos from those two dates. This is, unfortunately, it was when it was seeing better days. And this is what it looks like today. Here's another interesting perspective. This is from the early 70s, right before we moved in. This is in process. And that's what it looks like today. And here's another wonderful one from a different perspective. That one at the beginning of 1910, 1912, or 1919. This one was probably in the 60s. And this is actually after we moved out, but still has the furniture. And this is what it looks like today. Oops. That's a good one. There it is. Okay, I'm going to close. I have so many other pictures, but I am trying to stick to my 40 minutes. But unfortunately, I have to tell the story of how my parents purchased the house. And then we'll open it up and you can turn your video on. We'll show everybody. You can talk. that kind of thing, and you can ask questions. You're welcome to enter anything that you want into the chat as well if you want to have some questions. So how my parents purchased the house. This is the great story. So my parents were always the people that had the oddball house on the street. If there was a weird house on the street, we owned it. And when we first moved to Rochester, my mom worked with a realtor, and the realtor said, you need to live in the suburbs because you have kids and you want to go to these schools. And actually, we were coming from the house on the left is where we were coming from. It's a house in outside of New York City in Spring Valley, which is near White Plains. My dad worked for Xerox. That's why he was transferred, because he was working for Xerox. And so the realtor showed us this house in Penfield on Brookwood Road, and it fit my parents', requirements. My mom kept on saying, I want unusual and contemporary, unusual and contemporary. And that's pretty much what they could find that was the most unusual in this neighborhood. It has some glass windows on the back, and there's a beautiful stream. But my parents were in the house just for a few months, and this article showed up in the newspaper. And my mom was like, there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house here in Rochester? Oh my gosh. So she calls up the realtor and says, I want to see this house. Is there any way we can see this house? And the realtor said, well, actually, yes, I was one of the people that was interviewed to show this house, but it's not on the market right now. I'll see if I can get you an appointment. The realtor got them an appointment, and they went through the house, and they loved it. And they could not stop talking about it. They sat in front of the house in a very unusual car for hours. And the homeowner of the house, after the tour, the homeowner of the house came out curious about this young couple and talked to them. And my mom and dad said, we went to the house a few hours ago and we just really are interested. And he said, why don't you come in and I'll give you the grand tour of the house. So Louis Clark gave my parents the grand tour of the house. And at the end of the tour, they met his wife, Joan Clark, the one who had stripped that fireplace and said it was the worst job of her life. And my mom said, why do you want to leave out of this house? I mean, I just can't believe it. And she said, well, I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work. And my mom said, well, what are you looking for? She said, well, one, I want a house that requires no work, no more do-it-yourself repair projects. And number two, I'd really like something unusual and contemporary. My mom's like, how'd you like to come over for dinner on Saturday night? That Saturday night, they invited him over to the house, and they loved my parents' house. And by the end of the night, they brokered a deal and decided to trade houses. And the article actually made the paper. So my parents ended up, they got a moving van, and they went in together on it. And so the moving van picked up their stuff, dropped it off, loaded our stuff, drove back, and we ended up living in the Frank Lloyd Wright house. So that is the story of the house. Okay, can everybody see everybody? You guys see? Can you all, let me see if you can all see that speaker view. Okay. So if you want, in the upper right-hand corner, make sure you hit gallery view or speaker, if it says speaker view, and then you'll be able to see all the other people. And I apologize, I have to put my glasses on again. I took them off. I could not see at all anything. So but I did take them off. So now I can see. So she wrote me a nice little note. Oh, wow. Thank you for the note in the chat too. That's wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Anybody have any questions? And my parents, as I mentioned, are here as well. And so they can definitely answer any questions about the house. So you can either just go like this. Wait, that's gonna be hard because I have two things. There is a little function here that you can raise your hand, or you can just say, Kim, I have a question. Okay, Charles Lewis. I've got two pages with the people. We have a lot of people, so.
You wouldn't remember, but I think you were one of our first babysitters. We lived on Strathallan Park.
Oh my gosh, I do remember.
And you used to always complain about your father complaining about having to cover the roof with tarps and better, and you liked our house because it didn't leak.
Yep. It was crazy. We also, there's an amazing story in the book that when the house was we changed the roof. I didn't even talk about this too much, but the roof, my parents purchased the house for $110,000 and the roof cost $100,000 to replace. So, I mean, can you imagine going in there? And it took many years. And so when they got into this house, the guy, Smith was his last name. Oh, I can't remember his first name, but he worked on the roof, and he had put all these tarps, and they had a freak like windstorm. And that was one of those pictures, when there's tons of water because all the tarps blew away. And so it was really, really a project there.
Well, we've been in the house several times, and particularly since it's been restored. You didn't mention the garage had, the old garage had a turntable, which was common in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So the garage it didn't have a turntable. It had no, it didn't, but it had a car wash built into the ceiling. It did not have a turntable on the bottom. So it had a car wash on the top. It also had a bathroom and like a garage and attic part as well for the chauffeur. But no, it didn't. And it had these huge, massive accordion doors, which were such a pain to like open whenever you wanted to go and do anything.
Particularly in the snow.
Yeah, I remember your house. That's so funny. I remember you had a beautiful house too on Strath Island. Okay, any other questions?
You had a beautiful house. I got your cup, I think.
You do. Name is Jim.
Jim, okay.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's actually a comment. We actually live on Brookwood Road.
Oh.
Like 4 houses up from where you used to, where you briefly lived.
We were 55. We were at 55 Brookwood.
Yeah, we're 100. Yeah, we recognize the house right away. Although over the last year, it's been renovated extensively.
Oh, yeah, that's good because I went. I hope this person's not on this call, but I went there maybe 10 years ago, and I asked them, "Can I come into the house?" Because I was writing the book, and I thought it would be interesting, and she's like, "No." So, and I just remember it being more unusual than it was, like when I took pictures, I said, can I just take some pictures of it? Because it was brown when we moved in there and it was almost new. So nothing had been done. And I remember these massive windows in the back of the house. So I said, is that okay if I walk around there? So I walked around the back and I was like, those aren't very massive. It was just weird how when you're a kid, you just had a different perspective. that would be interesting to go see it again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yeah, I have PSHEISE. I don't know, the name is, you got to unmute yourself. Yes. Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. My sister lived kitty corner to that house, just moved 4 years ago, but I know the people that live in there now in that modern house that your parents owned shortly, and they're a young couple. They're a young couple.
Oh, in the Brookwood house.
Yes.
Oh, they're the ones that are renovating.
So they might be if you're going to be still in town sometime between your lectures, you might just ring their doorbell. They'll be there in the afternoon. They have a young one that goes to Indian Landing School.
I went there for 1 year. Mm-hmm.
So,
and then, I went to Indian Landing. Then I went to number 1, then 31, then 28. Then they kept on closing schools as I was going, or I got transferred around. Then I went to East High from 7th through 12th grade. So I was there. So I am in California. Some of you heard this who were here early, is that I was planning to be on the East Coast for my daughter's college graduation, which was canceled. And so then we moved the talks to October, and then unfortunately we still just did them virtually. So I do plan, hopefully they're going to, well, I don't know, if in the spring if they have it, but I love going back. I go back to the East Coast because both my kids are there. I go there all the time. So,
well, I think they would be probably up for you coming.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
The former owners.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Any other questions? Especially we got my parents here too. You can ask them my mom, she always thinks everything's great. I'm going to just get your perspective from my mom's Karen Brown. I'm going to spotlight you for a second, Mom. Why don't you say like what your impression was? Maybe Dad's there too.
Of course, I loved living in the house, and we had great parties, as you can see from the living room and the dining room. It's just so open, and we had fundraisers there, and it was just really a neat place to live. And of course, I made jewelry, spent all my time in the maids' quarters because that's where my studio was. It's kind of ironic that I'd live in that house and I'd spend all my time in the maids' quarters.
So what was interesting too is that my mom is very handy, and she also made a lot of these light fixtures, and she actually made one of the pieces of furniture that was in the house, like as an example, just to model and see how it was. And I remember she was taking it at the Bosse's. You were taking it at Bosse's, right? Weren't you making that? And she had told me the story, and I might be having it wrong, but they were like, you don't need to put all those extra pieces of wood on that table. You know, it was just that little plant stand. It was so ornate and elaborate for a plant stand.
Well, what looked like a very simple piece of furniture had 100 pieces of wood in it, a plant stand.
Yeah. I thought I would just tell you briefly about the furniture as well. You know, I think this is, well, okay, I'm gonna show you guys, actually. I'm gonna show you one really quick thing which is fascinating about the furniture. So I'm gonna do I gotta do a screen share again. This is, okay. Okay, sorry. This is why I had it all set up before I came on here. Let me show you screen share. Okay, so furniture real quick. I just wanted to show you guys briefly here. So these are the pieces of furniture that are in the house. This is a library table that was painted when we moved in. It was painted gray because it happened to be in the living room, poodle gray. It has since been really completely refinished and refurbished. You can see it kind of was cracked and warped on the thing. This is a buffet table. And then there was the dining room pieces. This is so interesting to me. I was doing a tour in Iowa. I was doing a series of talks in Iowa. I do talks for students and kids in classrooms. So I had 13 classrooms. And I said, yeah, I'll do any kids. And they all of a sudden, they gave me like kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And I was like, kindergarten, ah! But I was telling them that Frank Lloyd Wright has like 4 Lego sets. So they immediately thought, well, then this guy's made it. So he's great. So that's, you know, he was legitimate if he had a Lego set. Well, I walked into the Stockman house, which is in Mason City, Iowa, and there was this buffet table. And I know that each piece of furniture is specific to the house. And I said, that is the Frank Lloyd, that's in the Boynton house. That's the Boynton house table. They said, yeah, you know, you're right. We bought it on Shop Wright. Let me show you. And I went to the catalog. There it is. Any guesses on how much the Boynton house table costs? Probably nobody's guessing, but here it is. $4,000 for that furniture, that piece, or 36 if you remember. And this is, remember I was telling my mom made the plant stand. This is the plant stand. So you can see there are a ton of little pieces there. And then the majority of the furniture was in the dining room. You can see all of these, the table, the chairs. But what's super fascinating, this was one of my favorite things, is that if you look, you can see that in there, I think you can see my cursor, you have high back chairs with a very low ceiling, and then you have a very high ceiling and low back chairs. So what it does is this creates its own intimate sense of space by having the higher table backs and the lower ceiling. It looks like a separate room. And then this one is even more expansive. So he did a lot of really wonderful things playing with space. Okay, that's enough of that that I launched into. Any other questions? If not,
I have a question.
Sure.
It's about the dining room table. There seem to be like the support pieces on the sides kind of elevated above the table itself. And I was wondering whether that had a function or was it purely decorative?
These things, yes, they do. Here. So right here, you're saying right here, these things right here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So these are fascinating here. I even have, here's a great picture. So they have two things. One is that you can see there's this split right here. So you can pull those are on rollers and you can pull them back and then you can put there's 6 more leaves that you can put into this dining room table. But the real thing that these did is that Frank Lloyd Wright could not stand centerpieces. He didn't want them in your face. So these are his idea of centerpieces by putting these lights on the end. And what he specified is that he wanted to have, so each of these has a little light. It had see this little acorn pull switch. And he specified you had to have white flowers put in them. Well, we have air ferns, which require no maintenance because we didn't want to kill anything. But so these are lit, they were electrified light fixtures that were on the side, but then they had wheels that you could roll so you can pull back the leaves. So they have a lot of function. And then you have this little planter in here. And you can see, I mean, you can, if you really do an up close look at all the detail on every single piece, all this wood everywhere, all these little pieces. So that's a better picture. I like it when I get a question that I have all the images right there ready to go. So any other questions? My goodness, a lot of people still here. Yes, Mary Hill, I see. You can, oh wait, Mary, I can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't have questions, just a couple of comments. I'm from Rochester, so I did tour the house when it was open at once. I think probably your parents were there at the time. It was absolutely wonderful. Then a friend had a ring designed by your mother, which was equally beautiful. And then the last part was, having got interested in the house, I read the book Loving Frank by Nancy Horan, which brought Frank Lloyd character right to the forefront, good and bad, but it was very, very interesting, and so been interested in all his things all this time.
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you.
Well, if anybody's interested, I'd love them to purchase a book. What I did is I interviewed every single person who's ever lived in the house, and it was amazing. I went back quite far, and then I found a lot of research materials about the original owner and their family as well. So, and it's full of photos. So somebody asked, somebody said, what's the story about the sale of the house for the $200,000 price? That you have to get the book for. That is a dramatic story. This house has had some real trouble. So that's the only thing I'm going to leave you hanging there. It is quite the story. But let's put it this way. Some of those pictures that I have are as a result, like, you know, where the damage was really bad on the floor in the dining room was there. And did anybody ever go to the Memorial Art Gallery and see the furniture when it was on display? I don't know if anybody saw that.
Yes.
Okay, so it had to be taken out of the house, and that was
so they could work on it. Yeah.
No, it wasn't because they can work on it, because of what happened, what the owners did. Because of what them abandoning the house. So it's really interesting what's going on there. So that's you know, that's like giving away the climax of the book, so the spoiler. So so it was really interesting, but it was fascinating. Somebody else asked, was there a maid living quarters? Yes, there was. That was where my mom actually did her work. It has now been converted into a little breakfast nook. There was a bathroom back there. I mean, it was a tiny little space off of the kitchen. It was interesting. The whole house is, you know, white oak, red oak, there's some mahogany, and then you walk into the kitchen and it's pine and maple, like the quality of it. But it's still, like, unlike the Roby house, where they don't even have nice windows in the servants' quarters. At least in our house, they kept with the expensive windows, because I think the Boyntons just spared no expense. There are 2 floors in the house plus the basement. My husband's 6'4", and so the basement was basically off limits to him. He just said, I was just cracking my head the whole entire time. And it also was asbestos when we were there, but nobody thought about it until later. But that's all been repaired, taken out. It had 4 bedrooms, living room, dining room. It also had, the other room. So technically you would call the dressing room is another room. Like there was a dressing room. Like my room was amazing. It had 2 dressing rooms and a bedroom. And my mom, like, it was built for a widower and then his 20-year-old daughter. So her room is like, it's like 4 places. So my mom actually kept all of her clothes in my house, in my room, when I was a kid. She just was like, you don't have any clothes. Mine was just full of hamster supplies, basically, and junk and a little bit of stuff. One of the bedrooms was an office. Downstairs, there was also a room where it was made out of mahogany. It was where you would do business. We called it the library. And that was pretty much where we spent most of the time, because we had a space. We went through 3,000 gallons of oil every year when we were living in the house. And this was on the austere, you know, plan. So we were always wearing sweaters, and we would sit in the little library. We would close the door. We all had like Snuggies or sleeping bags, and we would sit there, and we'd have a space heater. And that's what we'd usually sit in that little room, because the whole house, I mean, it just wasn't insulated, even though the storm windows were up and everything like that. So I think and then the veranda, the porch was one of the rooms as well. I hope I covered all those rooms. So I think I covered them all. You know, the maid's quarters, the veranda, which is now an open porch, and then dressing room, and then the library. I think. Any other questions? And let me see if I have any other ones that I didn't read on there. So, oh, somebody just said that they were, yeah, somebody worked for Rochester Preservation Board. That's wonderful as an intern. That's good. So thank you guys. I mean, I really appreciate if you know anybody else who's interested in seeing it next week or even this afternoon, they're welcome to. I really appreciate I love the libraries. I love doing it for the libraries. You guys have the best questions. You're the most enthusiastic group, you know, and I love my Rochester crowd.